Hi, everybody. I'm Seba. I'm a graduate student at Stanford in the Carnegie Institute, very interested in sustainable agriculture. Um, so I'm really interested in discussing the topic of the movie today with you guys about like wasted food and how do we move forward. Um, so I'd love to get your uh, I'm going to get started before we get to introductions with the panelists about the rules of engagement for the participants. First of all, thanks for attending. And I'd like to say that all questions entered in the registration form before 1 p.m. today have been received. And if you have any additional questions, you can put them in the Q&A box for the panel, and we will get through as many questions as possible, but unfortunately, we will not be able to get to all. So without further ado, I'd like to let the panelists introduce themselves. Um, let's get started with the producer of the film, Jenny.
Thanks so much. So if you watched the film, you probably saw all about who I am. I thought I would give kind of follow-up to what happened after the film, because it was produced in 2014, which was like a really important time for food waste. Around that time that the film was getting released, it kind of hit this mainstream audience. So the film went on to MSNBC, and it was New York Times Critics List top TV shows of the year. And then they were mentioning food waste on all these mainstream outlets, not specifically to do with our film, but it was on the Tyra Banks show, it was on the cover of National Geographic. It was kind of the right time to start talking about the issue. And I wish I could say that we've solved it, but we haven't. But the film was able to reach millions and millions of people, tour all around the world, be translated into 14 languages, and enjoy many, many hundreds of community screenings, which, that's just the starting point. So I hope that the film kind of sparks something inside you that makes you want to know more, or makes you want to talk to your neighbor about the issue, or talk to your local politicians, or to your local gleaning group. I know that one film can't change the world, but if we get this message enough, then we can have a ripple effect to make change. So from a personal level, it impacted our lives because this was the point at which we shifted from our regular day jobs to being full-time filmmakers and activists. So we were able to tour around with the film, and then we went right down the film route and have made many, many films since then.
Okay, thank you. Let's go now and let Yuka introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Yuka from Food Shift, and we are a nonprofit organization that is predominantly active in California, Northern California, and but we'd like to think our impacts are global. So we recover food that would otherwise go to waste, and kind of like what Jen said in the movie, that there are lots of like single kind of thing that you can't use if you're an individual. So like this piles of hummus packets that they discovered in the film. So what we do as an organization is that we can have regular relationships with people, so they don't have to put it in the dumpster, they come to us. So we go to them or they come to us, and we can deal with 2 crates of watermelon or 2 crates of something else that an individual can't deal with, because we have a network of folks and predominantly grassroots organizations who already have food assistance programs. And so rather than them spend the money that they raise to buy the food, they get it from us. So that, again, kind of like that grocery store that Jen used to volunteer for, it makes it affordable for those organizations to be able to offer food assistance programs. So that's one of the things that we do. The difference between us and the food bank is that we also believe that hunger is not caused in this country by lack of food, but rather lack of access. And so we want to make sure that through our commercial kitchen, we are offering food culinary education to folks who are facing employment discrimination and they are not just the recipient of our food, but rather they are part of our workforce. So it's community helping community, it's mutual aid, and that we are also trying not to compete with the food that's recovered, because that's actually, because of the pandemic, recovered food is actually quite, how do I say it? There's a competition for it. And so we want to make sure that there are other things that, which is edible, that are discarded, that we make, for example, spent grains from beer production, or schmaltz from chicken broth production. So we make that into doggy biscuits, again, with the help of our apprentices that are in our culinary training program. Seba, do I have time to show the film now, or should I do that later? Just a little.
No, go ahead. It's only
Okay.
like 2 minutes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, oops, sorry. Okay.
Operation Together is Food Shift's food recovery and redistribution program. While we had a food recovery program prior to 2020, we amped up our program in response to COVID, providing excess food from wholesalers and other grocers to our neighbors in need through our partnering organizations. 3 times per week, our senior food recovery specialist, Robert, goes to produce markets and picks up excess food that vendors are unable to sell because of surplus, mislabeling, peak ripeness, or slight imperfections. It's often hard to tell why the food is coming through our doors, and hard to imagine that if we had not gone to pick it up, it would have gone to landfill. The food gets brought back to our headquarters in Alameda, and food shift staff, culinary on-the-job trainees, and volunteers weigh and sort the produce. The recovered food is carefully curated to reflect the physical and cultural needs of each partner. Some partners prefer bulk fruits and vegetables, while others need produce bags packed. Each step in the process is done with safety, care, and dignity in mind. These organizations specialize in serving people that have been marginalized by our society, ranging from houseless folks, domestic violence survivors, recent immigrants, people who identify as Black and mixed race, veterans, and people with disabilities, all populations that are often overlooked. Since April 2020, 291 tons of food has been redistributed. Operation Together nourishes 13,000 plus neighbors weekly. Through our food waste reduction, education, and advocacy efforts, we want to see less of this and more of this. We are bringing to light that there is value in each person and the power to nourish in every fruit and vegetable.
Thanks so
Right.
much.
Thanks for that. And then lastly, we have Dr. Yael Glazer.
Hi, yeah, it's great to be here. My name is Yael Glazer. Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah, all right, great. I'm a research associate at the University of Texas at Austin. I work in the Weber Energy Group, which is a research group within the mechanical engineering department at the university. Before I kind of dive in a little bit about me, I thought I could tell you a little bit about the group and the research that we do. We do all things energy, really is truly at the heart of what we do. But we like to do things from a systems level. So let me give you an example. We do a lot of modeling of the electric grid, which is not related necessarily to food waste, but we care about understanding how changes in renewables to the grid, more EV charging, weather of the future, and more of these impactful events that happen, and how we can sort of deal with that in a growing, as demand grows on the grid. We also do a lot of research around energy and water nexus, and this is the idea around how energy and water are inextricably linked. When you have an issue in your energy system, you're going to have an issue in your water system, and vice versa, which can be very challenging, but also could mean cross-cutting solutions. And then the other big bucket of research that we do, and it's growing, which makes me very excited, is around circularity. And that's the concept of one man's waste is another man's treasure, right? So in other words, waste streams from one process can actually be inputs to another process. And so we're looking at that from a variety of different ways, but food waste being one of them. Can we find other ways to harness the energy in food waste? If we can't find someone to give that food before it goes bad, can we harness some energy from it? And what would that mean in terms of offsetting things like fossil fuels and things like that? So that's kind of the research of the group. And I'm not sure entirely the audience and where y'all are from, but if you're interested in going to graduate school in engineering, especially around energy and all things energy, I would love to talk to you more about that. A little bit about me. I have a non-traditional path to where I am now, but I spent the first few decades of my life in California, got my undergraduate degree at Berkeley in bioengineering, went and worked in the biotech industry for a long time, got interested in water issues, which led me to UT Austin and have stayed here ever since. I have a growing interest in dealing with waste streams of all sorts, including food waste. And so that's kind of been one of my focus areas. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Thank you.
All right, great. So let's get started with the first question. So a lot of people are interested in knowing what the sort of like the major levers that are required of us to reduce wasted food, like anything that has to do with like on the personal level or the governmental level or societal level. Like people want to know basically what are the major sort of like things that like we should do to move forward and reduce wasted food.
Go ahead, Jen.
I was going to pipe in and just say that I feel that people should interject themselves where they feel most comfortable. So, you know, we came at it from an individualistic standpoint because we had come from a background of making a film about garbage and waste and recycling. And we felt that it was a really tangible way to make a difference. Like you can see when your garbage is getting smaller. And similarly with food waste, you can see when you don't have food waste, you can see when you're composting, and it's so tangible and rewarding. So for some people, that's an easier way to start than talking about carbon emissions or things that are harder to visualize. The other way that I like to get involved as an individual is to volunteer with local organizations. Like the excitement and the passion of people on the ground that are actually making a difference is invaluable, and the connections that you can meet through that might lead you to the next thing. So, I mean, we got involved in advocating for policy later on, but it started for us in our own house, dealing with food waste that we were creating ourselves.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jen, because, you know, this is one of those climate issues, which is huge, but this is one area where we all have a part in, and that we don't have to be just wagging the finger at politicians for not doing enough. We can do more ourselves, and we are all at fault for not doing enough. So we do, you know, how many times did we order at the restaurant too much, left stuff on the table on your plate, or packed it up to go, but then you forgot about that food and it just sort of rot in the fridge. Or we overbought, or I think the label is the best example of not only things that we could fix in terms of policy, but if we educate ourselves that use by date is different from sell by date, and also that use by date doesn't mean that one day after that or 1 hour after that, that all of a sudden it's inedible. So as the movie showed, that's one of the ways that we end up wasting perfectly good food. So I think if we could control that, we should be able, if we could curb that 40% of food waste that we're doing in the households, we'll be able to make a big dent.
I'll just add to that I thought one of the things in the film that was very interesting, resonated with me, was the quote, or maybe I'm paraphrasing, that abundance is the success story of the human species. We have, I mean, most of humanity, there wasn't excess in terms of food, but we've made it, right? We're here, and we have that luxury now, and totally agree with you, Yuka. Like, we, you know, how many times has my family been like, I don't want to eat leftovers, I want to eat something different, and things like that. So there is a lot of behavioral changes that need to happen, which are challenging. And I think having some understanding around what behavioral science looks like. So it would be interesting to include as well, and changing that and understanding it's okay to eat leftovers, and certainly the labeling piece is huge. A lot of people really don't understand that just because it says Best Buy, that it's just Best Buy doesn't mean anything went wrong, you know? So I think there needs to be a lot more communication, education around that. I could keep going on, but I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think that having a sort of intersection of like how do we get like people more educated into like them being the force of change, you know? Like, that's really good. Yeah. Next question. People are really interested in knowing how to find food that is still good but will be wasted. And how can people get like buy and eat food that doesn't look perfect?
So I live in Vancouver, British Columbia. So my hotspots for dumpster diving are probably not going to be your hotspots. And I'm not advocating that as a lifestyle. I want everyone to know that that was an experiment to understand the quality of food that is being thrown away. However, now that we're not in the project anymore, I definitely still try to rescue food. I know lots of bakeries that sell day olds, or that mark down their milk, or will cut up produce and put it in a bag for like stir fry bags. Those organizations are ones that I try to support. I don't mind paying for it, of course. A lot of the food that we found was at the wholesale level. But again, I'm not advocating for it, but there are organizations as well that are moving food from place to place, and some have mandates to support nonprofits and low income, and some have mandates just to provide food to people. So they have open markets and people can come and take what they need. Same thing with gleaning. Almost every time I've gone gleaning, you leave some for the landowner, you take some to the nonprofits, and you can take some home too. So that's a nice way to participate.
I think it's important to, maybe this is a good place to say it, it's not food waste, right? Like, it's not waste. The noun that we use, waste, it's not waste. We waste it. So it's wasted food. Food is the noun. And I think if you can start thinking that way, each and every one of us, maybe we'll recognize that it's the solutions aren't out there. The things that we can do aren't out there. It's in our own kitchen, you know? And so, yes, do go volunteer, because that would get you to change your behavior at home probably. But don't think that just legislation or just something will shift, because we have to shift, as Yael said. And we need to make sure that just in our mind, it's like we are doing the wasting. And kind of to respond to one of the questions in the Q&A on the web, it says, you know, is it possible to regulate or mandate through legislation to require businesses to donate unwanted food to specific areas? Yes, absolutely. California's SB 1383 is mandating that with very mixed results. I support the concept of the legislation, but to think that the waste that we're creating, like we are doing the wasting, and why should folks who are facing food insecurity be the solution to that? Why do they have to take tons and tons of packets of hummus if that's not what they want to eat or can eat, or massive amounts of sugar-laden snacks that are at expiration date? Why is it their problem? This is all of our problem. We need to be producing less. And so I would like to see legislation that would support reduction of inventory to make sure that there is no loss or minimal loss, rather than producing it, make it into food waste, and then repurposing that for poor people to eat. Like that's backwards. So I would mention that.
Yeah, I think like people want to know what in your opinion are like federal policies, as you're like mentioning now, that like are really just like adversely affecting the food waste problem, as in like stuff that like as you said, for example, like managing like the amount of production, like stuff like that, that you could think that like on a massive scale it could make like very quick changes or like effective changes towards like reducing the amount of food waste.
Should I answer that? So there's lots of issues with our food ecosystem in general. It's very very vertically deep, but also horizontally integrated in a way that is not flexible because we optimize for profit, right? So when the pandemic came, we had lots and lots and lots of milk that we simply dumped. Why? Because the milk was produced in a factory that only serves high schools or school cafeterias, hospitals, and other institutions that are in bags, right? The bags with special spigot that attaches onto a very special container. And so you couldn't then undo that bag and make it into single portions that could be consumed by a regular household. So then they just all got wasted. Because again, it was like the movie said, sometimes it's just easier, or most of the time it's easier to make it into waste, just to put it in compost or just to put it in landfill than to have it be repackaged or repurposed or even remanufactured into some other food product. So yeah, that's the food system that we have. And I want to also mention that it doesn't have to be that way. If you look at indigenous food systems, there is no word waste in the food ecosystem map because to do so in their philosophy is to admit that the system is broken, right? Any system that has waste in it is broken. So it's always repurposed or reabsorbed into the system. And so it's important to note that what we are experiencing now is of our own making. If it's of our own making, we can undo it, we can dismantle it, we can replace it with a different system. And it starts with us. Just, don't make this into like a big project. You can have just like one day or 1 week, just see how much kitchen scraps you're creating or how much food that we don't consume for whatever reason, and maybe weigh that and see how you feel about that and see if you can reduce that. See if you can repurpose your leftovers and make it into a challenge.
Yeah, I think that people are also very interested on like how to educate themselves and how to get their like best information on this topic, because I feel like for me personally, like I wasn't aware of like all these things, a lot of things that were presented in the documentary, and I was also very curious as like how do I educate myself, like how do I find resources that will help me reduce my own food waste, because something that I might see as garbage is something that I could end up using for something that's useful to me and like people that live with me. But I don't know how to like find these resources quite yet, and I think a lot of people are curious to know where can they get educated and find the best information.
I could go on and on about this. So at foodwastemovie.com, which is the website for our film, there's also a resource page. And it's got like kids activities and it's got links to different organizations like Love Food, Hate Waste is one of my favorite ones. They're out of the UK, but they also run a site out of Canada, and they have all kinds of tips. They have an app where you can like type in a couple things that are in your fridge and it'll give you a recipe. Also, the Natural Resources Defense Council has a lot of great literature and reports if you want to educate yourself further. And they did a great campaign about food waste at the household level, if you want resources to post around your building or at your workplace. And I also really like the on-the-ground activities that nonprofits are doing. So I've participated in many food rescue, or I should say surplus food dinners, where we'll actually have an event, have a chef come in, make a dinner and experience food that way. And then the cross-pollination of ideas is amazing. There was a screening that was organized in California in the early days of this film, and there were people from all over the place that came. Food Shift was there, Dana was there from Food Shift, and actual nonprofits that are on the ground doing work today got started just because people came together for a dinner there. So that's another way to get resources. There's all kinds of people in your community that are just as excited about this topic as you are.
Yeah, there are lots and lots. I mean, we have the internet now. And so all you have to do is type in, stop wasted food or food waste prevention. There's Stop Food Waste Day. There's stopfoodwaste.org. There's, tons. And like Jen said, I mean, if you have like a tub of sour cream that's just in your fridge and you used it for some recipe and you have like 2/3 of it left, you don't know what to do, you just type in what to do with leftover sour cream and it'll just give you tons of recipes, right? So I think we're all afraid to take the action and we keep waiting for knowledge or magic wand, but we have power to address this, and I think we need to just start acting. So hopefully today, after this movie discussion, you can go into your fridge and do a quick inventory of what might be looking a little sad and create what Jen did, the eat first box in your refrigerator.
Yeah. I guess like now that we're talking about how to turn like the food that you think is waste into something useful, I think like Yael could talk a little bit about like how do you actually, instead of like doing something in your house with like a different recipe or something like what kind of other things can you do with unused food and turning it into resources?
Yeah, so you would have to do it sort of on a city level. Oh, you don't have to. You could have a anaerobic digester in your backyard. But the point being is you can get methane out of it, which is renewable natural gas, and use that for cooking or even just in the supply of natural gas in a city, for example. And that would offset some fossil fuel natural gas. So that's one thing you could do. I mean, that's kind of the main thing we were looking at in terms of just understanding if you were to do a calculation around how much food is wasted and converted that to the amount of renewable natural gas you could get out of it, it's a few percent of the overall natural gas used. So if that makes sense, it's like 3% of all natural gas that's used in the home could be offset by the renewable natural gas that could be gotten from food waste. So it's a non-trivial amount. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot when you think about it. But the challenge around that would be logistics, right? You need to have a whole system set up to do that, to collect it, to centralize it, to run it through an anaerobic digester and all that kind of stuff. Now, a lot of cities around the country have curbside composting programs. So maybe those cities are a great place to start because they're already collecting it. They already have trucks going through the city weekly, picking up. People are already separating out, their organics, collect it and do that centrally. So that's one idea. And I think I'll stop there with my ideas for that. Does that help answer your question though? But I would say, the movie, what I loved about the movie is it kind of gave you a hierarchy of how you want to handle food waste. And I think that's correct. People first, right? Get as many people fed first. See if you can feed it to animals, work your way down. The very last thing should be doing that. We shouldn't say, oh, okay, well, I didn't eat this in time. Okay, well, at least, to make myself feel better, I'll compost it and try to get some renewable natural gas out of it.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about like what happens like once you buy the food, but I would like to transition a little bit into like the process of buying the food itself. And I think people have a lot of questions about like, what does it mean to like buy something that is like not necessarily perfect, or like how do we get sort of the conversation to change this? Like, how do we like as consumers, like push the companies like from the ground up to just be like, hey, like I'm okay buying something that's not like necessarily perfect. Like it's totally fine to do.
Yeah, well, who defined perfect? You know what I mean? It's like, do you want to be like listening to the man who decided the perfect banana was of this curvature and of this ripeness? It's not even perfect when you bring it home. It's terrible when you eat, quote unquote, the perfect banana from your supermarket. So perfect is what you want to use it for. You know, if it's for banana bread, you need it to be a lot riper. So it's not perfect. And oranges that have blemishes, they're often, I think, exposure to sun. So it's actually could be sweeter. I know there are types of oranges that are actually sweeter when they look uglier. And so again, who defined perfect? It's, I mean, are we all going to be listening to propaganda from food industrial complex, or are we going to make our own decisions about this?
And beyond that, the food in the video, in the documentary, I mean, that they said was imperfect, looked perfect to me. I mean, it looked great. I was confused by why it was being rejected, and it was disheartening to see that.
Yeah, honestly, I would definitely buy a lot of that food. Yeah, I think a lot of people are very curious about like what the sell by dates and the best use by dates are. I think people are kind of confused as to, the safety of it all, and just like what exactly does that mean as a consumer? Like, does it mean that like if I buy this, like it's not gonna last very long, or if I buy this, it's already like rotten? But like what are good guidelines to figure out, like based on like what we see or like the dates that are given to us, like what should we be buying?
I can say that unless you're um, feeding infant formula or having a nutritional meal supplement, like things where the nutritional value is really, really important and you wouldn't want it to degrade, the dates aren't super important. I mean, it's really not about food safety at all. It's just about peak freshness. And so I have a friend who works for a wholesaler, and he often gets back the food because retailers think they can't sell it or they want to send it back. And as a wholesaler, he wants to keep his clients happy, so he takes it back. And then he's always dropping food on our door that is close dated. And I tell you, if you open a bag of chips and it smells not great, then it's probably going rancid. It's not going to kill you. You'll probably be able to make the judgment call right off the bat. So for those shelf stable foods, not canned goods, but for like crackers and cereal and stuff, I feel like if it's off, it's off, and the date is not really very important.
Exactly. The smell test is everything. That's why we have the ability, that's what our noses are for, is really to detect if food has gone bad. And so that's a really good way to figure it out. I agree with you, Jen.
Also, I think, food safety, food handling is more important. So if you brought home perfectly fresh looking thing, or expiration date is 2 years down the line, but you had dropped it and the lid broke the seal or whatever, or you brought home milk and you set it on the counter for too long, well, those are all things that would contribute to how long it would last. So even if you have a fridge and you put it in the fridge, like how often do you open the fridge? All of those things could matter. And so those things probably matter way more than what's printed. So again, do the sniff test. You can lick a little bit, check for visible mold, fuzziness, all sorts of things.
And dates really are for like the greater population as well. Like we have to remember that they're very conservative because they're taking into account all kinds of people that are very young and very old and might have compromised immune systems. So you have to gauge kind of where you fit within that realm when you're making those decisions. And we're not talking about eating moldy food, or, if you've got an apple and it's, rotten. We're not talking about eating food scraps. It's really about food that has come through the system that might look a little bit imperfect.
Yeah. I feel like for me at least, like I grew up in like the tropics, So like I'm very used to like a particular sort of diet and food. So like moving to California where there's like an emphasis on like other types of like food and stuff, like I think for me it's always like there's seasons here. So like everything is just like very different in terms of like what you can get in the summer versus like what you can get in the winter. And for me, like I don't really know like what's in season or what's not, you know, like it's just kind of like in the supermarket. And like we've gotten a couple of questions of people like do we as consumers kind of like want to, in order to reduce food waste, should we like target things that are like better in season, or just like you know just are more available around that time of year instead of like waiting for like overproduction, like with the sort of the eggplant thing that happened in the movie, where it was just kind of like a surplus of eggplant at a certain point because like you couldn't really like supplement the parts where you couldn't get the um extra food. So like I feel like seasonality of products is also something that comes into play, but I don't know how to, like, I guess like figure out what that is, and how to, as a consumer, just get better at that sort of situation.
Yeah, I would again go back to other cultures. You know, in Japan, there's a word called shun. Shun means what's in season, and you celebrate it, and then you're okay with not having it when it's off season because you're celebrating that particular season. So I think in the movie it was zucchinis. Well, you can have fried zucchinis. You can, you know, maybe you can pickle zucchinis. You can do different kinds of zucchinis. Maybe you will enjoy different forms of zucchinis in other seasons, like frozen or whatever. But yeah, eat a lot of zucchinis. It's also not only good for the earth that it just naturally wanted to produce that during that season. So you required less, you know, nutrients or less other things that we had to intervene with, worms, etc. And it is more affordable. And I don't think we talked about how much we actually waste. So 40% loss in the households for each, I think, household of 4 people, depending on the research you use. I think it's per $8,800 per household per year is lost. So that's somebody's emergency fund, you know, and it turns out that we are wasting food at home at the same rate for regardless of your income level. So that means it's going to hit harder for folks who are paycheck to paycheck. And so if you can capture back that food that we waste, that's better, right? So again, we get taught that we have to peel carrots. Why? Our carrots are now, you know, of varietals that has very, very thin skin where you just have to wash it. You don't necessarily have to peel it because once you peel it, the peel is a loss, right? Or maybe you're good enough to compost it. Maybe you can even make it into vegetable broth. That will be all good things. But if you just eat it whole, I mean, it has nutrients everywhere. And sometimes the skins are more tasty than the inside. So just like revisiting our assumptions of broccoli just eating florets, like, no, the stalks can be eaten. You just have to peel the thicker layer or steam it longer, you know, cut it in thinner slices, put it in stir fry, all of those things. So again, appreciating, you know, nature's harvest as it was intended to. We can't be forcing our own idea of this particular recipe, it only required just the florets. Like you can see all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some people are curious to know like if there are like any sort of educational programs that could be like put into like the radar of like younger people, like in schools, where we can just kind of like I think I would have loved to learn about like how to best use like a vegetable to its like full degree. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm cooking, and if I'm running a little short on something, that's when I get creative. But I feel like I should be doing that all the time.
I don't know about specific programs for the K-12 age group, but I will say that I have visited my children at their school at lunchtime and seen the tremendous amount of food waste that happens. So I do think there needs to be more education starting young that we shouldn't be wasting food or not taking food we're not going to eat, and deal with it starting at a young age. So I would love to also hear about these programs.
Shameless self-promotion. We have a shorter cut of this film. It's 50 minutes long and tons of schools use it in their curriculum. And we've gone in and done discussions with groups, and we have educational resources. If you send me an email, I'm happy to send them to you for free. I've also participated with a local organization called Growing Chefs, where we go into the classrooms once a week for 8 weeks, and they're actually growing their own food and then tasting different vegetables. And the teachers have reported that that makes a really big difference to the waste in their school, because all of a sudden they're like excited about things. They're like, I know about snap peas, I know about radishes, and they're more willing to eat their lunches somehow just because of this education. They're all excited about growing their own. So maybe there's something on the ground where you live that's similar to that.
Yeah, I appreciate all the questions around education, especially young people. I think anything that talks about behavior shifts comes better with the younger generation. I think we did that with recycling, where I think kids learned about it at school and then came home and, hassled their parents to make sure that, hey, like mom or dad, you should be, doing this. So I think it's going to be similar for the food. And there are lots of curriculum out there. We also have one that we're developing. We have an older version that talks about how to use the food in abundance without having, terrific kitchen techniques, without having expensive equipment or exotic spices. You could make any of these recipes using food from your food pantry or food banks. So I think we're collecting resources, Saba, and sending it to people who request it. So like we have this that you can download from stopfoodwaste.org site. So things like that. There are lots available on the internet. And I think incorporating it into home economics type curricula would be helpful, as well as infiltrating cafeteria menus.
It's a little bit different in Canada. You have such a wonderful opportunity in the United States because you do have lunch programs in schools. We don't have that. I mean, occasionally a school will have a lunch program, but it's not widespread like it is in the United States. And I know there's lots of issues with that system, but at least you do have all the kids sitting down at one time, and you have the opportunity to educate them through what they're eating. But I realize that it takes an extra level of participation, maybe by parents, maybe by staff, to kind of get it to the nutritional and educational level that it would be ideal.
Yeah, we are definitely compiling resources, and we will share them at the end of the panel. So if you had any questions about that, we have quite a few questions about like composting and home composting systems and stuff like that. I think we discussed a little earlier about like when is it like the best idea to like do compost versus like seeing if you can like use the food that you have. I think people just want to know a little bit about like when, like what are your thoughts on composting systems? Like when is the like when is it the best strategy to like compost instead of like using the food to try to like salvage some of the edible parts of it, you know?
I think it goes back to that food waste hierarchy. So anytime that you can eat the food, make sure that you're eating it. I know lots of people who take if they have carrot peelings or potato peels, then they put them in a separate bin in their freezer. And when the bin is full, they make a vegetable stock out of it. I know my grandma always drained her pasta water into like a mason jar and then used that as the base for her soups. So there's lots of little things you can do like that. If you have municipal composting, you have a little bit more leeway with the things that you can put in there because they take meat and dairy. If you're composting in your backyard, they recommend that you don't put that stuff in there. Same thing with bread and rice. So you want to make sure that you're making a portion that you can eat. And I think they say rice is like 4 days in your fridge. So, just watch the portions that you're making. I am part of a local buy nothing group where people just give freely and take freely, and people are always putting food on there. They're always like, I made too much of this, like someone come and get it from my house. And because it's quite a close-knit community, we have that trust with other people's kitchens, and it's really nice to see that interaction between different community members. Does that answer enough of the composting question?
Yeah.
There are composting, again, internet has everything. So that there are composting hints in there, including like getting those special earthworms that, compost for you. And then there's special fungi that compost for you. And for the municipal composting, there are resources available too if you go to their waste management agency sites, websites. Many jurisdictions who require composting or highly recommend composting also provide you with composting buckets sometimes that you can order for free, that could sit on top of your kitchen counter to make it easy for you.
In terms of composting, I also, one of my biggest pet peeves is that people just forget about caring about the environment when they go on vacation. And they use water like crazy, and they use resources like crazy, and they forget about composting because maybe there's not a composting bin there. I just went away for the weekend, and like my girlfriends know, I'm bringing a bin and it has a lid, and we're going to fill it up, and we're going to drive it home, or we're going to knock on someone's door and ask if they can compost for us. I think through this project, even though I was like embarrassed at the time, I've really gotten to a point where I have no shame in regards to food waste. And whether it's composting or asking for something that's imperfect or seeing if there's anything that's been culled for the day, I think that the issue is more important than any embarrassment that I might feel. So I've definitely gotten over it.
Yeah. Very good advice. Okay, we have a question about sustainable farming. So there's a comment in the documentary where one of the speakers is saying that like we spend all this time trying to like get all these farmers to be like just a little bit more efficient on their water use and like fertilizer use and stuff like that. Like as somebody that is passionate about sustainable agriculture, like what role do you guys think that like shifting from like industrial agriculture to sustainable agriculture, does that play a big role in like reducing food waste, or is it just something that might not have that much of an impact?
I think it does. Yael?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, there's so much energy embedded and emissions involved in the whole food supply chain, right? From farm to fork. So if you can combat food waste and you don't waste as much food, you're saving all of those inputs all along the supply chain. And that being said, there's a lot of things we can do along the supply chain to sort of quote unquote clean it up, right? At the farm, for example, we can electrify a lot of the equipment, right? Go from using diesel to using electric tractors and things like that. And when we do that, and then we decarbonize the grid, we're going to reduce emissions at the farm. We can do a lot of things like that. Electrify our transportation system, all these different things that helps reduce emissions from along the supply chain. So I'm not talking about necessarily sustainable farming, but just different ways to reduce emissions along the way is one thing we can do. But I think, tackling food waste is a big one, is a huge one. I mean, there's just so much energy, water, nutrients, all kinds of resources that went into making that food, and then packaging, and then all of that kind of stuff. And then if it was prepared food, then there was energy and emissions involved in cooking it and all of that stuff. And then to just throw it away, right? So I would say that would be a huge one. And then let's also simultaneously, let's also clean up our whole food supply chain. Hopefully that kind of answers a little bit that question.
I think Jen's film captured one of the issues for the farmers, which is that they're not necessarily financially incentivized to pick up the things, or if they are asked to produce celery of a certain size so that they can be bagged in a particular more convenient way, then we do end up not using all of the celery. So, so the consumers have to be okay with not having it in some convenient bag. And we need to make that preference known to the companies who are creating that. There are entrepreneurs like Full Harvest, which is making sure that there are secondary markets for cast off celery bits or lettuce that's not perfect, or figuring out ways to harvest so that when they harvest, if it touches the ground, you can't sell it. So ways of harvesting, engineering solutions that, and also people and procedure solutions that to make sure that when they're harvesting, little bits don't fall back into the ground, and that there is secondary market that they can create for it. Mainly folks who are making commercial juices, for example, because they don't care if it's a small piece or a big piece, and they don't care if it's too ripe. Too ripe is perfect for juicing. So yeah, so that I think there are things that are getting done but just not as many and fast enough. And that's because we don't have the incentives in play.
All right, we have about 3 minutes left. So I want to open up the floor to see if there are any final comments you guys would like to leave to the audience.
Start now. Take the smallest step. Don't wait until big plan appears in front of you. Whatever you were inspired by in the film, or because of the film that you read certain things, turn that into the smallest action you can. Just do it today. So within like 2 hours of our conversation, pick one thing you can do and do it now, and then make it into a daily practice.
I love that. I'm going to go see what's in my fridge right after this.
I'd encourage everyone to destigmatize the issues that we have around surplus food. So bring that container when you go to your friend's house for dinner. If they're throwing things out, just say that you'll take it. It's not a big deal. Start that conversation, and you never know what action will come after that.
I guess I'll just leave it with the thought that, food waste means also wasted energy and the emissions involved in the whole system. So if your concern is maybe more environmental, then think about it from that perspective. All of the energy, all of the effort that went into bringing it to you, packaging it, all those kind of things. And if you throw it away in the end, then all of that was wasted. So maybe that's another way to look at it as well.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks for the panelists for being here to answer the audience's questions. And thank you for the audience for engaging with us and making us have a good conversation. We will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow with a feedback survey and links to the resources. And later this year, we will be hosting another movie screening. So any feedback that you can provide will help us improve for the future. And yes, thank you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Be a food shifter. Peace.